I'm Nora Bennett, 35 years old, and on the night this began, I walked into my parents' Tudor-style mansion with rain dripping from my sleeves and a prayer caught in my throat because my daughter had collapsed at school. The foyer chandelier threw hard light across the marble, and for a second it felt like standing on stage before the crowd even knew the play. My mother's smile froze when she saw me, then turned to glass as the room quieted around champagne and string music. My father guided me toward his study as if we were stepping out for a polite conversation, not a plea for a child's life. I had 48 hours to find a way. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to hold your ground when no one stood with you. I grew up in Portland, the girl who fixed her own hand-me-downs and sketched floor plans on the backs of church bulletins raised on simple rules my grandmother used to say out loud. Be kind, be steady, leave places better than you found them. My parents built a reputation on polish. They hosted the sort of parties where names carried weight and a missed RSVP meant you might not be remembered next season. When I married Adam, we made a different kind of home second-hand chairs I reupholstered on the balcony, a kitchen table scarred by homework and late-night takeout, a little girl named Lily who loved to crawl into my lap and narrate her drawings. Money felt like weather in our world, some months clear, some months gray, but we were warm because we were together. Nothing about that prepared me for a school nurse's voice asking me to come quickly or a doctor saying the words congenital defect and we need to act. By the time I pushed through my parents' front door, my hair still damp from the walk across their circular drive, I knew exactly what I had to ask. Their house glittered fresh flowers, catered bites a quartet in the corner, while my phone held a timeline measured in hours. The difference between our lives felt like two photographs layered on top of each other, my small apartment with its chipped mug and stacked invoices, their ballroom glow reflected in crystal. I wasn't thinking about pride when I stepped into my father's study. I was thinking about Lily's hand in mine and the way her breath had hitched behind an oxygen mask. I opened my mouth to tell them everything, and the party's laughter swelled. Just beyond the wood-paneled door, a reminder of what mattered most in that house and what did not. I stood on the Persian rug and told them what the surgeon needed the window we had the amount I couldn't reach alone. My father's jaw worked. My mother's eyes flicked to a bracelet she always promised would be mine one day. I explained the payment plan and the loan officers know the savings we'd already emptied the car Adam had prepared to sell by morning. Their faces didn't change, not at first. When the doorknob clicked and my brother leaned in with a champagne flute and a smile meant for guests, I felt the room tilt as if the floor itself were deciding which way to throw me. My father's study always smelled faintly of leather and old tobacco, even though he'd quit smoking before I was born. The wood-paneled walls closed in around us, muffling the party outside. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace as though it had slipped out of place, her eyes moving past me to the rainwater dripping from my coat onto the rug. I steadied myself on the edge of the desk and told them what Dr. Carter had said. Lily's heart couldn't wait, not another week, not even another 3 days. Without surgery, we were out of time. My father's face barely shifted, his expression carved in stone. How much, he asked. My voice shook when I gave him the number. My mother's eyes widened briefly, then narrowed with calculation. Insurance should cover this, she said, almost to herself. I explained that the timing had caught us in the worst possible gap between policies with savings already drained from medical tests and mounting bills. I tried to hold their gaze as I added that Adam had sold his car that I had pulled from every account we had, and it still wasn't close enough. My knees gave out under the weight of it, and before I realized I was kneeling on their rug begging for help, I swore I'd never ask them for again. They exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations they'd perfected over a lifetime together. My mother sighed, her shoulders dropping with something like weariness. "We simply can't, Nora," she said softly. "Tyler's wedding is in 3 months and we've already committed." I blinked, not sure I'd heard her correctly. "Committed?" My father cleared his throat. "Deposits, The venue, the catering, the honeymoon package? $250,000, non-refundable. He said it as if it were the most reasonable explanation in the world. The door opened, and there was Tyler, leaning against the frame with a champagne glass in hand, Jenna's diamond flashing as she hovered just behind him. "Always trying to make everything about you," he drawled, swirling his drink. I rose slowly, the heat rushing to my face. "This isn't about me," I said. "This is about Lily." His smirk didn't fade. "Maybe next time you'll plan better. Some of us have futures we've worked hard to secure." My mother shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My father looked at his watch as if he had somewhere else to be. Outside the door, laughter rose from the crowd. My mother reached for her bracelet, the sapphire one that had been passed down from my grandmother, the one she had always promised would be mine. "There are consequences to poor financial choices, Nora," she murmured. The words landed like stones in a well. I stepped closer and unfastened the clasp myself. I placed the bracelet back into her hand, curling her fingers around it. "Take it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll find another way." My father began to speak, but I straightened my back and walked past them toward the door. Their whispers followed, but I didn't turn around. The crowd in the foyer shifted when I appeared, damp hair clinging to my face coat still dripping. Eyes followed me as I crossed the marble floor. I caught the murmur of voices, poor Richard and Valerie, that must be their troubled daughter, before the night air hit me cool and sharp against my skin. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Adam's message lit the screen. "Any luck?" I looked back at the glowing windows of the house where I had just begged for my daughter's life and found nothing. My fingers moved across the screen. "No. But we'll save her anyway." I didn't go back up the steps. I didn't knock again. I walked to the car with the rain soaking through my shoes, carrying with me the sound of Lily's question from earlier that week. "Grandma and Grandpa have the biggest house ever. Do they love us big too?" The answer was clear now, though I could never bring myself to say it out loud. And that night, as I drove back toward the hospital, I felt something inside me shift from pleading to resolve. By morning, I would have less than 2 days left, and the search for another way had only just begun. The house was quiet when I came back from my parents', the kind of silence that feels heavy. Adam sat at the kitchen table with the phone pressed to his ear, his free hand covering his face. When he hung up, he pushed a check across the table. $8,000, he said softly. "I sold the Mustang." The car had been his pride, something he'd rebuilt piece by piece since his teens, but his eyes told me there was no hesitation. I added the check to the small pile we'd scraped together. Our savings, the early withdrawal from his retirement, a few hundred, I'd pulled from my design account. Still 23,000 short. My chest ached as I calculated the gap for the 10th time. Adam pulled me against him, his voice steady even when his hands shook. "We'll keep looking," he whispered. The hours blurred as I made call after call. Bank officers, loan companies, even friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Each conversation ended the same, a polite refusal or a dial tone. At 3 a.m, I sat on the kitchen floor with the refrigerator humming beside me, staring at Lily's latest drawing taped to the door. Stick figures under a bright yellow sun, a red heart drawn in the corner with shaky letters, "I love Mommy." The doorbell startled me at dawn. Adam stirred on the couch, bleary-eyed as I opened the door. My in-laws stood on the porch, coats pulled tight against the cold. Frank's cap was pulled low, his expression solemn, while Marlene clutched her purse close to her side. "Can we come in?" Frank asked. His voice was gruff, but there was a tenderness beneath it I hadn't heard before. We sat in the living room, the envelope between us on the coffee table. Marlene's hands trembled as she slid it forward. "We sold the cabin," she said quietly. For a moment I didn't understand. That cabin had been their dream, built board by board over summers long before Adam and I met. It was the place they had always said they would retire to. Adam's voice broke as he shook his head. "You didn't have to do that." His father looked at him, his eyes the same deep brown, steady and firm. "Family is what we have to do." Inside the envelope was $38,000. I pressed my hand to my mouth as tears blurred my vision. Words failed me, but Marlene reached across and took my hand. "This is what family does," she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. The next day we were back at the hospital. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and burned coffee, its harsh lights buzzing overhead. Adam filled out the last forms with unsteady hands while I clutched Lily's stuffed rabbit, its fur worn thin from years of love. Frank and Marlene sat across from us, a thermos of soup tucked between them. They didn't try to fill the silence with words. They simply stayed. Hours passed. 10, then 12, then 14. Time crawled, measured by the squeak of nurses' shoes and the occasional buzz of the vending machine. My body felt numb by the time Dr. Carter appeared, his cap still on exhaustion etched across his face. He removed his mask and offered a tired but certain smile. "She's going to make it," he said. The breath I'd been holding for days finally released, leaving me weak with relief. Adam pressed his forehead to mine, tears streaking both our cheeks. Across from us, Marlene covered her mouth with her hands, and Frank closed his eyes, murmuring something I couldn't hear. The weight lifted from all of us in that single moment. Later, when I sat beside Lily's bed, her chest rising and falling steadily, I thought of the stark difference between two sets of grandparents. One who had turned away, protecting their social calendar, and one who had sacrificed everything they had built just to give her a chance. Frank sat by the window teaching Lily how to cast an imaginary fishing line with the IV taped to her arm. Marlene unpacked a container of stew, filling the room with warmth that the hospital air couldn't provide. The truth settled in quietly, the way new light creeps into a dark room. Love wasn't measured in promises or appearances. It was in who showed up when the night was longest. And as I watched Lily's fingers curl around her rabbit, I knew the days ahead would not be easy, but she was still here. We were still here. The first week after surgery passed in fragments beeping, monitors whispered updates from nurses, and the rhythm of Lily's small chest rising and falling under the thin hospital blanket. I spent most nights in the chair beside her bed, the plastic digging into my back, while Adam rotated shifts with Frank and Marlene. They seemed tireless, arriving with thermoses of soup, fresh blankets, and the kind of calm that steadied the room. By the second week, Lily's cheeks held a hint of color again. She asked for crayons, and Marlene bought a pack with every shade of pink she could find. Together, they filled page after page with castles, sunflowers, and shaky rainbows taped to the walls. Frank brought fishing magazines and showed her pictures of trout and salmon, telling her about rivers he'd taken Adam to as a boy. Lily promised she'd catch the biggest fish when she was strong enough. Neighbors I barely knew started showing up at our door with casseroles and grocery bags. My employees dropped off design samples and updates, assuring me not to worry about deadlines. Adam's coworkers pooled their vacation time so he could stay with us longer. I began writing everything down in a notebook at Lily's bedside, each kindness, each meal delivered, each prayer left on our voicemail. The pages filled quickly, a quiet record of how people had gathered around us when we needed it most. One afternoon, while Lily napped, I sat by the window with that notebook open on my lap. The winter light caught on the scar running down her chest, still angry red, but healing. My mother's words echoed faintly in my mind. Consequences to poor financial choices, but they no longer had the same weight. What stayed with me instead was Marlene teaching me how to check Lily's bandages, Frank adjusting her pillows, and Adam brushing her hair gently so she wouldn't tug at the IV line. When the hospital finally released her, we returned to an apartment overflowing with containers, labeled in Marlene's neat handwriting. Chicken stew. Heat slowly, apple pie best served warm. Beef chili feeds 4. Lily curled up on the couch in her Wonder Woman pajamas, her rabbit tucked under her chin, and laughed for the first time in weeks. The sound filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. I worked when I could, sketching designs at the kitchen table while Lily slept. Some nights I stayed up past midnight, coffee cooling beside me, trying to piece together proposals between medical bills and final notices. The pressure was heavy, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer wanted to rely on anyone's approval, not my parents', not even the clients I once thought I needed to impress. I wanted stability, something strong enough that Lily would never face this kind of uncertainty again. Adam noticed the change. "You're different," he said one night, watching me redraw the same hotel lobby 3 times. I shrugged, pushing the pencil across the page. "I just know what matters now." He didn't argue. Instead, he placed his hand over mine, steadying it, and whispered, "Then let's build from that." Weeks turned into months. Lily grew stronger, chasing Frank across the living room with a plastic fishing rod, while Marlene baked bread that filled the apartment with warmth. I returned to my design work slowly at first, then with a new kind of determination. Every setback became another sketch, every rejection another chance to refine. The fear that had driven me through my parents' front door that night was still there, but it no longer controlled me. It had turned into something sharper, something more like resolve. One evening, while Lily practiced her letters on the floor, I opened the notebook again. The list of names, meals, and small acts of care stretched across dozens of pages. I closed it carefully and slid it into the drawer beside me. That record wasn't just gratitude, it was a map of where true family had shown itself. And as I tucked Lily into bed that night, her small arms wrapping around my neck, I promised myself that I would never forget who stood with us when the storm came. The bills on our counter never stopped arriving. Even with Lily healing, I felt the weight of each envelope pressing down harder than the last. I worked late at the kitchen table, coffee cups gathering around my sketches, searching for a breakthrough that could lift us out of survival. That was when the Westbrook Hotel's contract crossed my desk, an open call for proposals to redesign all 7 of their boutique properties. The budget was nearly $2 million. It was the kind of job I had no business chasing, not with my small portfolio and no office to speak of, but I couldn't look away. I spent nights refining boards and samples until my hands cramped, balancing hospital follow-ups by day and design layouts by night. Adam and Marlene kept Lily busy with forts and games, while Frank handled the meals. When the presentation day came, Marlene pressed a travel mug into my hands. "Strong coffee," she said, smoothing my blazer collar. "Go show them what you can do." Her words steadied me more than I realized. The Westbrook conference room overlooked downtown Portland, its wall of windows flooding the long table with light. 3 executives weighted their suits sharp, their expressions unreadable. Charles Whitman, the CEO, leaned back in his chair while Elaine Foster, the marketing director, studied my slim portfolio. Victor Hayes, the CFO, tapped his pen on the tabletop. "Ms. Bennett, Charles began, your proposal is unconventional. You're a single designer, not a firm." I nodded, forcing my voice steady. "That's true, but I know what it means to design for real people, not just photographs." A glance passed among them, skeptical but curious. I opened my boards, laying out sketches and sample fabrics. Hotels aren't just buildings. They're the backdrop for honeymoons, reunions, even grief. What makes a space memorable isn't the size of the lobby, it's whether it feels like it was built for the people inside it. Elaine looked up from her phone, tilting her head slightly. Victor checked his watch. My stomach sank, but I pressed forward. I unveiled my designs for guest rooms with reading nooks tucked into corners. Children's suites with practical touches for families and business rooms with lighting that shifted to match time zones. Still, their faces gave nothing away. Then I pulled out the final board photos of Frank and Marlene's cabin before and after I redesigned it. Last year, I said quietly, my in-laws sold this cabin to help save my daughter's life. After her recovery, I rebuilt their new space to honor who they are. I pointed to the fishing rod storage. Frank had always wanted the kitchen island wide enough for Marlene's pie crusts, the window seat angled for bird watching. That's what I do. I design spaces that remember the people inside them. The room stilled. Even Victor set his pen down. Charles leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Why do you deserve this contract, Ms. Bennett?" His voice was even, but the weight of the question filled the air. I thought of Lily's scar and Frank's steady hands guiding her with a fishing rod made of air. I thought of Marlene's soup filling our fridge and Adam selling the car he loved most without a second thought. My answer was simple, because I've learned what matters, and it's not what most people think. 3 days later, I was washing dishes when my phone buzzed with an email notification. Adam read it over my shoulder, his voice breaking into a cheer before I even finished the first line. Westbrook had awarded me the contract. My knees gave out and he caught me spinning me around the kitchen while Lily danced circles around our legs. "We did it," I whispered, hardly believing the words. Within months, I opened the door to my own office for the first time. The frosted glass read Bennett Design Studio, and behind me, 3 designers were already setting up their desks. The Seattle expansion was underway, with more hires waiting to join. My phone buzzed with the text from Tyler, but I deleted it without reading. The only thing that mattered was the team I had built and the family waiting for me at home. That evening, I stood in our living room watching Lily climb onto Frank's lap, asking him to tell the trout story again. Marlene carried in a tray of her latest bread, and Adam winked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. My office might have been miles away, but the real proof of success was right there in front of me. The Westbrook contract was only the beginning. Within a year, our studio had expanded to offices in Seattle and Denver, with San Diego already in the works. Awards lined the shelves, not for luxury projects, but for healthcare facilities and family-centered spaces. Every step forward felt like laying bricks on a foundation built out of those hospital nights. When Entrepreneur magazine called for an interview, I hesitated, but the journalist insisted my story mattered. Sitting across from her in my office, I spoke plainly about what had driven me to start over the night my parents turned me away, and the people who showed up instead. A month later, my face was on the cover with the headline, "Rising from the Ashes." The article spread faster than I expected. My phone lit up with messages from business leaders I had admired from afar, praising resilience, praising integrity. Invitations poured in, podcasts, conferences, features. Even Good Morning America reached out, wanting to focus on our healthcare policies and how we offered full benefits from the first day of employment. But success carried its own ripple effects. A colleague forwarded me a note from a charity board member who mentioned my parents' absence at events they never used to miss. Their business was struggling, losing clients who didn't want their name attached after the article. Tyler's promotion fell through when his firm questioned his judgment, citing concerns about reputation. The fallout reached them whether I wanted it to or not. I didn't gloat. I didn't even respond when Jenna's number appeared on my phone one afternoon. But when she finally sent a letter months later, I read every line. She wrote about realizing what kind of man Tyler had become, how my story gave her the courage to file for divorce. I couldn't ignore the contempt he carried for anyone who didn't live up to his image, she wrote. Her honesty stung, not because I pitied her, but because the picture she painted was so familiar. At home, life looked different. Lily thrived, her scar fading to a thin line across her chest. She practiced piano on the instrument Frank had found at a church sale, her fingers dancing over the keys with confidence that grew each day. Marlene started bringing over fresh bread for our office staff, her small way of helping us stay grounded. Adam found his place managing operations for the studio, steady and reliable, a partner in every sense. Yet the shadows of my old life never disappeared completely. Emails from my parents went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Every so often I'd hear from someone who mentioned they were trying to make amends, though the words were vague, never directed to me. It was as if they wanted the appearance of reconciliation without the work. One evening while clearing dishes from dinner, Adam found me staring out the window, the lights of downtown glowing in the distance. "You're waiting for them to change," he said gently. I shook my head. "I'm not. I'm just making sure they can't reach us the way they once did." He nodded, pulling me close, and in that silence I realized I wasn't holding my breath anymore. Months later, a voicemail arrived I couldn't ignore. My father's voice, worn and unsteady, asking for a meeting. The business was gone. The house was under foreclosure. They had nowhere else to turn. I listened twice before erasing it, my finger hovering over the callback button. It wasn't anger that stopped me. It was clarity. The morning my parents arrived at my office, the city skyline stretched beyond the windows, bathed in the pale light of early fall. I had asked my assistant to let them in without announcement. When the double doors opened, I barely recognized the two people who stepped through. My father's shoulders slumped inside a suit that no longer fit his hair thinner than I remembered. My mother clutched a worn handbag, her makeup applied with a shaky hand, her eyes darting around the room as though cataloging every success displayed within its walls. "Thank you for seeing us." My father began, his voice carrying a faint echo of the authority it once held. He gestured toward the chairs, and they sat across from me, carefully composed but unraveling at the edges. My mother attempted a smile. The magazine feature was lovely. "We're so proud of you, Nora." Her words sounded rehearsed brittle against the silence that followed. My father leaned forward, fingers laced together. "We've fallen on hard times. The store, it didn't survive. The house is under foreclosure. We've tried everything, but the bank won't wait any longer." My mother's eyes glistened as she added, "Family should be together during times like these." I let the words settle before I reached into the drawer of my desk. I placed my phone face up on the table and pressed play. My father's recorded voice filled the room, sharp and dismissive. "Your irresponsible financial choices aren't our problem. Tyler manages his money properly. Perhaps you should take notes instead of asking for handouts." The message ended, leaving only the hum of the air system between us. Neither of them spoke. My mother's gaze dropped to the floor, mascara smudging as tears welled. My father's throat worked, but no words came. I studied the framed photographs lined across my desk, Lily smiling with Frank and Marlene at her school recital, Adam holding her after she learned to ride her bike, our team gathered in front of the new Seattle office, images of a family that had chosen to show up when it mattered most. "Did you ever visit her?" I asked softly. "When she was in the hospital fighting for her life, did either of you step through that door?" The question hung in the air unanswered. My mother's shoulders shook, and she pressed a tissue to her face. My father's hands tightened into fists, then loosened, helpless. I slid a black leather case across the desk. My father's hand hesitated before opening it. Inside, stacks of bills filled the space neatly. $100,000, I said evenly. "Exactly what you need, not a penny more." My mother lifted her head, her voice trembling. "Nora." "This isn't forgiveness," I interrupted. "It's freedom. Mine." They stood slowly, the suitcase between them, their reflections wavering in the polished marble floor. My father's posture sagged further as he clutched the handle, his eyes avoiding mine. My mother whispered something I couldn't make out before turning toward the door. The sound of their footsteps faded down the hall until the silence reclaimed the room. For a long time I remained standing at the window, the city stretching outward in golden light. My hand brushed across the photograph of Lily holding her stuffed rabbit, her scar just visible at her collarbone. The weight I had carried for years of not being chosen, of never being enough, slipped away like a chain falling loose. The office door closed behind them, and for the first time since that rain-soaked night I felt the full measure of release. Not triumph, not revenge, only the quiet certainty that the chapter was over. The seasons turned quickly after that meeting in my office. My parents faded from our lives carrying the suitcase I had given them, and with it the last tie that bound me to their approval. What remained was the life we had built without them, solid, warm, and real. At home, the sound of Lily's laughter filled every corner. Frank taught her to flip burgers on the grill, his calloused hands guiding hers, while she squealed at the flare of the flames. Marlene set the picnic table with napkins and condiments humming as she worked her quiet care, stitching our days together. Adam leaned against the porch post, watching the scene with a smile that reached his eyes. Neighbors drifted through the garden gate, carrying pies and folding chairs, and soon our yard was full of voices and movement. Lily pressed a crayon drawing into my hands, a row of stick figures standing beneath a sun, our family holding hands, Frank and Marlene drawn right beside us. "This is us," she said firmly. Her words stayed with me. She never asked again why her grandparents hadn't come to see her in the hospital. She no longer needed that answer. She had already chosen the people who showed up. In time, our company picnic grew to include dozens of employees and their children, each one covered by the healthcare plan I insisted on after what we endured. Scholarships we funded helped first-generation designers take their first steps into careers I once thought were closed to me. The work mattered, but the people mattered more. At night, when the house grew quiet, I sometimes sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, listening to Lily practice piano inside. Her small fingers danced over the keys, her heart beating strong, her scar only a pale reminder of what we'd survived. I wrote a line in my journal one evening: "The greatest revenge isn't in their downfall. It's in building a life they can't touch." Looking back, I see now that justice wasn't about making my parents pay for what they did. Justice was learning to live free of the weight they placed on me, surrounding myself with people who gave love without condition. So if you're still listening, I'll leave you with this. Family isn't always blood. Family is who stands with you when the storm comes, who shows up without being asked, and who stays long after the struggle has passed. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Tell me in the comments if you found family in unexpected places, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll be here for the next story.